Hey everybody, this is Miss Moriarty, and I'm here to discuss with you a little bit about the AP exam in more detail than I did on the first day, just because we're going to be doing a lot of FRQ practice as well as multiple choice practice this year. So I just really want to make sure that we understand how we're going to be assessed on the AP exam because I'm going to reflect that in how we're assessed in the class. Now, I know I went over this a little bit on day one, but just to give you another overview, remember it's broken down into two parts with our multiple choice being 80 questions and at least 60% of your score, while the FRQ is broken down into three different types of questions. That's about 40% of your score, with about 70 minutes in total. Now, what I didn't go over on day one are the types of FRQs that you're going to be seeing on the test. And so those are those right that you see here. So question number one, this is going to be some sort of design and investigation involving some sort of experiment. So they're most likely going to give you a scenario of some sorts, maybe even data, a graph, and you're going to have to identify variables, hypotheses, and maybe even come up with some sort of procedure and potentially predict data. In question number two, they are going to provide you some sort of environmental problem, and you will have to then propose a solution. While question number three is going to be similar to number two, however, they're once again going to give you a problem, but you will now have to propose a solution while also providing mathematical calculations. So that is where math is going to be embedded here as well. Once again, just a little bit with the multiple choice distribution. These are all of the 9 units that we're going to be covering. This is their exam weighting that you'll see throughout our exam. And just remember, take note, Unit 9, which is global change. You're going to see a lot of that topic appear on here. Once again are the 4 big ideas that I mentioned on day 1 as well. These are the 4 main themes that our class is based off of, and you'll probably hear me refer back to them as we move through different units in the school year. Also, remember, not only are we learning content in this course, but we are also learning science practices and skills. And those are broken down into 7 practices in our course, with practice 1 being concept explanation. Practice 2 is some sort of visual representation. So that's being able to look at a diagram, look at a graph, and take out information. Practice 3 is text analysis. So you'll find in the multiple choice section of our exam, there will be a couple of questions that will ask you to read some sort of excerpt or paragraph, and you'll have to answer questions based off of that. Practice 4, this is scientific experiments. So this is being able to identify testable hypotheses, coming up with research methods, and identifying variables. So you'll see that a lot in the FRQ section. The last few is data analysis, mathematical routines. So this is analyzing and interpreting quantitative data that might be represented in a table, chart, or graph. Mathematical routines, this is going to relate to mainly that one FRQ that we will find on our exam. However, there will be actually some mathematical routines required on the multiple choice section as well. So it's really important to feel comfortable in using things such as dimensional analysis, since that's a very popular mathematical routine you need to know. And then lastly, practice number 7, that is environmental solutions. That's probably one of the biggest practices in our course, is understanding what the problem might be and what might be the appropriate and relevant environmental solution. And so once again, here's just kind of the breakdown on the multiple choice versus the FRQ section of how each practice or skill is going to be assessed. Now, getting into kind of the nitty gritty of our multiple choice here, this is just a little bit of a breakdown of what you might see. So you might have about 3 to 4 sets, including some sort of quantitative data, maybe some questions, might primarily assess maybe practice 5. You can have at least 3 to 4 sets, including qualitative data or information. So that's looking at maybe a model of some sorts, a diagram of a biogeochemical cycle, maybe even a map. And as I mentioned before, you should have at least 2 sets, including some sort of text-based resource. So here's kind of just some examples here, right? Question number 1. We can see also even in question number 3, right? They're providing you some sort of graph, some sort of diagram. You have to answer the questions based off of that diagram. You'll also notice in number 4, you're not only looking at the diagram, but you're also going to be applying some sort of mathematical routine. And in question number 2, this is simply just a concept explanation here. We kind of see similar questions, right? We once again have some graphs that we're referring to, as well as mathematical routines and concept explanation. Now let's get into our FRQs. So we said FRQ number 1, that's where we're designing an investigation. So you're going to be provided some sort of authentic environmental scenario, probably accompanied by maybe a model, visual representation, maybe even quantitative data. You're going to have to then propose some sort of environmental experiment, investigation, and so on. So once again, this type of FRQ is going to be assessing you on practice 1, 2, 4, 5, and 7. Now, unfortunately, I don't have an example of FRQ number 1 right now, just because our exam actually recently changed in the past few years. So there really hasn't been too many examples of FRQ number 1 that have been published for my resources. However, we will be practicing these throughout the school year. So I will embed that type of skill in all activities that we do. Now, in FRQ number 2, right, we are given an environmental problem. We need to propose some sort of solution. Once again, it might even be accompanied by a model, visual, maybe data. And so here we are assessed on 1, 2, 5, and 7. Now, in FRQ number 2, these are just a list of some popular topics that we tend to see for those types of questions. So things like human population dynamics, sustainable agriculture. All of these topics, obviously, we will hit each and every one as we go through the units here, and I will kind of mention what types of FRQs they might appear on. So here's just a nice example of what FRQ number 2 may or may not look like when you take the exam. So here they give you some sort of visual representation. They give you a graph here, and then what you have to do is use your practice number 5. So you are doing some sort of analyzing data with concept explanation and providing some sort of solution in the end, which is really important. And then lastly, this is FRQ number 3. So pretty much the same type of question, except here, this is where you're going to be doing some sort of mathematical routine. And so this time we are assessed on practice 1, 6, and 7. And here's just another example of that here. So you'll see, right, we have a little bit of environmental solution questions asking. And then towards the end of the problem here, we have some calculations that we need to provide. Note that on FRQ number 3, and I will stress this a ton in class, you'll notice that each question says, show your work. You need to make sure that you are always showing your work, even if it's just simple addition that you can do in your head. If it's on the FRQ, you must show your work as well as include units. And so we will go over that at more length later. Now, the last thing that I want to end with is what's called the task verbs. So if you noticed, as I go through each of the types of FRQs, The questions are going to be framed with these types of task words that you see here on this slide. So it's really important to understand and recognize what each task verb is and what it's going to be asking you to do. Because one of the most difficult parts of answering an FRQ is making sure that we are answering the question exactly as we need to. So, for example, the word describe, whenever you see that in a question, that tends to mean that that answer should have two sentences. It should be basic in your response and should have key details on whatever the topic may be. While explain should be a little bit longer, about 3 sentences or so, should have some sort of cause and effect, maybe a step-by-step process that you have to outline, and you want to make sure that you're connecting the dots and ensuring that your end kind of circles back to what the prompt originally was. Versus maybe identify is simply just one sentence max, should be a very simple answer, does not require any elaboration. Because remember, you are going to be timed. You only have 70 minutes to complete 3 FRQ questions. So you really want to make sure that you're not wasting your time. Now, another piece that we're going to talk about later on in the week is going to be how I would like you to annotate your FRQs. So you'll see here, I would like us to, whenever we get an FRQ, we're going to circle the task verb that you see here. Write about a sentence or so in length of the requirements. You're going to then box or frame any modifier. So what I mean by modifier, that's a term or a phrase that's going to limit you to what you should answer. So some examples of modifiers are what's called the 3 E's: environmental, ecological, and economic. So anytime you see something that's asking you for an environmental problem, that's usually associated with water, soil, atmosphere, habitats, versus, say, maybe economic, that always refers to jobs, revenue, profit, taxes, and so on. Some other modifiers might be maybe except, other than, not related to, besides. And the last piece that I would like us to do as we annotate FRQs is underline any key terms, any vocabulary, and simply just put them in your own words and define them in the margins. All right, everyone, that's the end of this video. Please make sure that if you have any questions for me, please jot those down and have those ready for me next week when I return. If you're all done, please mark this video then as done.